Rameck. My freshman year at Seton Hall was like living in a foreign country where few people looked like me or spoke my language, and the trouble started right away. I had been on campus just a half a semester when I invited my stepbrother Michael to visit me. I called him my stepbrother, but he was really the son of my father's longtime girlfriend. Michael had dropped out of high school, and I hoped that exposing him to college would encourage him to return. In elementary school, he had been a smart kid who made straight A's, wore glasses, and loved to read. The kids at school, in his neighborhood, and even his family had called him a nerd and teased him. I teased him too, but as we got older, I felt bad for him. I knew he was a good guy, and I could see the teasing was really bothering him. His grades fell. He began hanging out with troublemakers and eventually just stopped going to school. He began working out in the gym and transformed his once scrawny frame into muscles and mass. Before long, he was getting into trouble too. He accepted the invitation to visit me at Seton Hall, and he brought one of his cousins and another friend with him. They ran wild on campus all day. About 1 o'clock the next morning, they were still at it, making too much noise in Bowling Hall, the freshman dormitory where I lived. I was afraid they would get us all in trouble, so I confronted Michael in the hall outside my room on the 3rd floor. He accused me of making a big deal out of nothing. My temper blew, and we began arguing loudly, as though we were about to fight. A crowd of students gathered around us, ready to watch some kind of showdown. All of a sudden, I looked up and I saw a bunch of white faces staring at us. I felt ashamed. We were a spectacle, confirming white people's worst stereotypes. Most of my encounters with white people at that point in my life had been negative. White sales clerks followed me through the store on shopping trips to the mall, white police officers stopping and harassing me on the streets of my neighborhood, white passengers holding onto their purses a bit tighter on the train when I passed them. To the average white stranger, I was an instant security threat, a thug, an object to be loathed or feared, not a human being with a heart and dreams of family and fears. I resented this stereotype, but instead of calming myself down, I turned my anger on the crowd. "Why don't y'all get away from here?" I shouted. "We're just having a little disagreement. This ain't nothing for y'all. We ain't no spectacle." The crowd dispersed, all but 2 white guys, who continued to stare. One of them wore an arrogant smirk. "Y'all didn't hear what I said?" I yelled. "I said leave." The one with the smirk stood his ground. "Well, we live on this floor too, we pay tuition too, and we don't have to go anywhere." My anger rose another notch. "Did you say?" I asked, feigning disbelief, staring him in his eyes, trying to intimidate him to back down. He repeated himself, full of that righteous white boy attitude. Now my stepbrother and his boys were looking at me as if to say, "Man, this white boy is getting the best of you. What are you going to do?" If I did nothing, I'd look like a punk. I walked over to him and stood chest to chest. "Look, I'm counting to 3. If you don't leave, you're going to wish you had." The white boy chuckled a bit in my face and then turned to his partner. "He's trying to threaten us. Like I really care." I couldn't believe this white boy was disrespecting me. Mind you, he was right. He had as much claim to the hallway space as I had, and I had no business ordering him to his room. But my mind was too filled with anger to accept a rational thought. All I saw was an arrogant white boy trying to put a nigger in his place. I slowly counted to 3. The white boy didn't move. With a strength that belied my small frame, I grabbed him simultaneously by his collar and his crotch, raised him over my head, and dropped him. He slammed to the floor, head first. His neck bent in an odd way, and his body fell limp. Fear replaced my anger. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my heart thumping wildly. I thought I had paralyzed or killed the guy. Suddenly he moved. I exhaled. But with my stepbrother and his boys watching, I couldn't drop my tough guy demeanor. "Now get up," I commanded. The boy was silent. His friend helped him up, and he limped away. I turned and walked past my stepbrother and his boys to my room. I fell on my bed. Sam was out that night, and George was across the hall in his suite. I lay in my room alone, thinking to myself over and over, "Man, what have you done? What have you gotten yourself into now?" About 4 a.m., loud banging on the door of my suite broke my sleep. "South Orange Police," a voice yelled from the other side. They had come for me. I resigned myself to what was sure to happen next. The white boy would press charges against me. I would get kicked out of school, and for what? Because the white boy didn't leave when I told him to leave? I was wrong, and I knew it. I just wasn't thinking about the consequences. On the streets where I grew up, you didn't worry about consequences. If someone disrespected you, you beat his ass, period. From the time I was a little boy, my mother had warned me never to come home crying because I was scared to fight back when someone picked on me. If you don't beat his ass, don't come home crying, she said. If you do, I'm going to beat your ass. Either way, you get an ass whooping. So who do you want it from? I opened the door to my suite and followed the officers to a small room downstairs. The dormitory director was there with the boy and his parents. Is this the guy? The officer asked, pointing at me. Yes, that's him, the boy responded. Do you want to press charges? The officer asked, seeming much too eager. The boy didn't respond. His mother looked at me. I expected anger, but there was none. No, we don't want to press charges against him, she said softly. That's okay. I looked at her with eyes that asked, You don't? I figured that's what they had come to do. Maybe she knew I would get kicked out of school if she pressed charges, and she didn't want to ruin my life. I don't know. But now the officer was telling me I was free to go. I wanted to thank her, but I was too shocked to speak. Her decision didn't end the matter, though. Because the incident had occurred on campus, I was summoned to appear before a board of university administrators who would decide my fate. The next day, my two white suitemates approached me. Sam and I had been cordial to them, but we mostly kept our distance. They said they had heard what happened and wanted to know if there was anything they could do to help. One of them said his father was a lawyer and could represent me if I needed. I thanked him for such a kind gesture, but I didn't really need an attorney. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the room, and about a half dozen administrators, mostly white men, sat around a long wooden table. One of them, a priest, with deep blue eyes and white hair, looked particularly sinister. The white boy was there, with his foot in a cast. His foot had slammed to the ground with such force that a bone had snapped. I was sure the administrators, after taking one look at him, would kick me out of school, no matter what I had to say. They called me to testify. I explained what happened and apologized to the guy I had hurt. I truly regretted what I had done. I presented supportive letters from one of my professors and Carla Dixon, who pleaded for mercy on my behalf. The administrators conferred with one another and announced their decision. They would give me another chance. They put me on probation for 6 months. If I got into any more trouble during that time, I would be expelled immediately. Silently, I thanked God. The mother's decision not to press charges against me had likely influenced the board. The compassion she displayed touches me still. It challenged the deep distrust I felt at the time toward white people. How could I continue to feel that way when this mother, who had every right to be angry that I had hurt her son, chose compassion instead? And when the administrators, who would have been justified in kicking me out, chose mercy? And when my suitemates, whom I avoided most of the time, offered their help? I was like, wow, there are some real cool white people in the world. I recognized that I needed to change. If I let my best friends down and blew this opportunity to get a college education, I could blame no one but myself. I prayed to God. Lord, I know I got to get my act together, because sooner or later, you're going to stop looking out for me. I'm glad God is patient, because before the end of my freshman year, I wound up in trouble again. Sam and I were in the room studying one day when some guys I knew stopped by for a visit. They were all dressed in Seton Hall sweatshirts and pants, and they bragged about how easy it was to steal them from the campus bookstore. I knew security in the store was lax, because earlier that year I had stolen a textbook I needed for class. I had run out of money, couldn't call home for help, and was feeling desperate. This time, greed was the motivation. I walked alone to the bookstore in the basement of one of the lecture halls and went straight to the rack where the sweatshirts were hanging. The store was empty except for the sales clerk behind the counter. There were a bunch of empty hangers and one large sweatshirt left. I scanned the store quickly with my eyes to make sure no one was watching me. Then I slipped the sweatshirt off the rack, stuck it under my shirt, and casually browsed around the store for several minutes. I thought about buying a pen or something cheap to lessen any possible suspicion, but I changed my mind at the last minute. As I passed the front counter on my way out, I felt the eyes of the sales clerk on me. "Excuse me," he said, in the most nasal, annoying tone. "What do you have under your shirt?" "What are you talking about?" I responded, trying to sound offended. "You have to come with me," he said. I couldn't believe this sales clerk, just another student, was challenging me. I took off running. "Hey, come back here," I thought I heard him say. I dashed up the basement steps and toward an open field. I was sure I had gotten away, but when I glanced behind me, I was shocked to see the clerk, a tall guy with long, lanky legs, following my trail. I poked my legs harder, but I was quickly running out of breath. I made it to President's Hall, the administration building, pulled out the sweatshirt and stashed it behind some bushes. At least if I got caught, I wouldn't have the stolen merchandise on me. I took off running again toward Bowling Hall. I glanced back, and the clerk was still chasing me. After about 10 minutes of running at full speed, I made it to my dorm. Another student was swiping his identification card to open the electronic doors. I rushed in behind him and ran down the hall to a friend's room. When she opened her door, I burst in and closed the door quickly behind me. "What's wrong?" she asked, startled. I told her I'd tell her later and asked if I could just sit for a while. I was too scared even to talk. Sweat dripped from my face like rain. I sat at my friend's desk, closed my eyes, and cradled my head in my hands. My conscience whipped me. I was still on probation. If the sales clerk found me, I would be kicked out of Seton Hall for sure. I had gambled with my future for a lousy sweatshirt. How could I be so stupid? There would be no more chances. Sam and George would have to go on without me. I kept waiting for the knock on the door. The clerk had chased me this far. I didn't think he would give up until he nabbed me. Surely someone had seen me slip into my friend's room. 45 minutes passed. I sent my friend into the hall to see if anyone was searching for me. Several people told her that a guy from the bookstore had been walking up and down the halls asking residents if they had seen anyone who fit my description, but he was gone. The hall was quiet. I needed some fresh air. I also still wanted that sweatshirt. Part of me felt crazily justified in trying to keep it, since I had gone through such trouble to get it. I walked outside and headed back across the field to President's Hall. My stash was gone. The sales clerk must have found it and taken it back to the store. As I walked back to my dorm, I got the feeling that I had just used my last chance. My mind quickly crowded with thoughts. I couldn't keep risking everything. College was different from anything I had ever known, but I could get so much out of it if I just tried. I was making good grades, which meant I was smart enough to be here. All I had to do was stay out of trouble. If I got kicked out of college, where would I go? Back to Mom's house? That would surely break her heart. And what would happen to Sam and George? I thought about my old friends in Plainfield. Of the 10 of us, only 3 of us had even graduated from high school, and I was the only one in college. The walk back to my dorm seemed to take forever, but I was certain I grew up that day. I finally realized that if I wanted to change my life, I had to act differently. I stopped stealing. I worked extra hours. One summer I even got a second job to help buy my books, school supplies, and personal items. Sam, George, and I borrowed from one another. And when that still wasn't enough, I just did without things I needed or wanted. When I told Sam and George what had happened, we laughed it off. Sam never said, "I told you so," though he had chosen to stay in the room when I left for the bookstore. By watching him and George, I began to see that I didn't have to act so tough to be cool, and I tried harder to control my temper. I can't say I was successful right away. I got into more fights, and I blew up more times than I would have liked. But with time and a conscious effort to think about the consequences before I responded, I slowly evolved into a different person. I rarely took time to read anything other than books assigned for class. But at a book sale my freshman year, one provocative title caught my eye: The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. I bought the book. When I read it, I saw myself for the first time. I didn't realize then that the same book had inspired Carla, my college counselor. In it, Jawanza Kanjufu explains that many black boys turn to the streets to learn how to become men because they don't have fathers at home and no one steps in to fill the void. He discusses the importance of reaching black boys before they are hardened by the ways of the street and build a rap sheet the length of a football field. I knew firsthand that he was right, and I immediately wanted to help. All my life, I had been taught that black people have a responsibility to help each other out. I heard it when I followed my uncles to gatherings of the Nation of Islam, and Bill, the owner of the barbershop where I worked as a teenager, preached the same message. Bill owned a small 3-chair shop that sat on Front Street across from the Anchor Bar, the corner store, and Steve's record shop. He was in his 40s when I worked for him, and he fit the mold of the stereotypical barber, opinionated and quick to dispense advice. He and the other barbers kept the place packed with men of all ages who seemed to enjoy sitting around debating issues of the day as much as getting a haircut. The men engaged in typical barbershop banter about sports, women, and politics. But when the crowd left and Bill and I prepared the shop for closing, I'd sweep up puddles of hair while Bill sat in a chair and pitched questions my way. Why did I think people in the neighborhood were so poor? What could I do to help? What did I think about God? What did the schools teach me about George Washington? Did I know he owned slaves? I was just 13, but Bill pushed me to question things and to think about issues I hadn't considered before. In high school, I even envisioned myself as an activist, but I never saw the dichotomy of that side of myself and the other side that stayed in trouble and did harmful things to people. I didn't think I was a bad person, but I kept doing bad things. When I read Kunjufu's book, I began to see myself more clearly, and I tried harder to change. I've always been a hyper, energetic person, so as soon as I read the book, I immediately wanted to act. I came up with an idea to start a mentoring program for kids in poor neighborhoods. I went to Sam and George. The three of us started brainstorming. We could recruit other volunteers, identify schools in Newark, and become mentors to the students there. We could even sponsor bus trips to bring students to Seton Hall so that they can see a college campus, perhaps for the first time. We wanted to do for children what we knew would have helped us. The three of us approached the Student Government Association, which ordains and finances official campus organizations. But the association was not eager to sanction a new group. The officers said we needed a faculty sponsor and a proposal before they could even consider our idea. They suggested we implement our program through an existing Black organization. Nothing motivates Sam, George, and me more than being told no. We quickly found a sponsor, Professor Forrest Pritchett, the professor who headed the African American Studies Department. Then we sat down together and put our ideas into a proposal. But what would we call our organization? In his book, Kunjufu discusses the principles of Kwanzaa. One of them seemed to fit, Ujamaa, which in Swahili means collective work and responsibility. I suggested it to George and Sam. They loved it. We went back to the SGA. This time, the officers gave in, but they awarded us a measly $500. They said we had to raise whatever else we needed. I have to admit we were pissed. We had grandiose ideas, and we thought just maybe some folks on our campus didn't want a bunch of Black kids from the inner city spending time at the university. That thought motivated us more. We set out to raise some money. During another brainstorm, we came up with a fundraising idea. We could throw a big party in the student union. We were an official campus organization, so we had access to the university's facilities free of charge. Since we always went to other nearby campuses to have fun because few parties at Seton Hall played Black music, we figured we could charge the standard $5, advertise big, and draw students from the colleges and universities we frequented. I don't remember who came up with the theme for the party, but it was perfect. Ujamaa Jam. By then, George, Sam, and I were sophomores. We had never thrown a big party before, but we had been around enough to know that the DJ was the key to success. We needed somebody who knew just what to play and when. One of us remembered that a friend of ours from high school was dating a popular DJ around Newark. We called her, and she helped us book him at a discount rate. Next, Sam, George, and I used a computer to make flyers. Each of us took a bunch and drove to different campuses within an hour's drive, Rutgers, Drew, Fairleigh Dickinson, and others, to spread the news. We walked around handing out flyers to other students and placing them on car windows. We distributed at least 1,000 flyers. The problem with throwing a party like this, though, was that we had no idea until the night of the gig whether it would be a success. That night, 3 of us got there early to meet the DJ. We had asked other volunteers to collect money at the door because we had too many friends we knew would try to get in free if they saw one of us standing there. I watched the door all night, and within the first 2 hours, we had packed the house. After expenses, we cleared several $100s. The party was such a success that we threw another one and sold soda and chips. We chose 2 elementary schools in Newark. George, Sam, and I recruited a few other students and began visiting the schools at the end of the day at least once a week to tutor students and talk to them about college. But when we approached the principals about busing the kids to campus, we got a lukewarm response and ultimately got bogged down in discussions about liability. We were just 19 years old when we planned our organization, so we naively thought that recruiting mentors and bringing kids to campus would be simple. We thought that other students would be knocking on our door to help and that public school officials would bend over backwards to provide kids with this opportunity. We learned really fast that we were wrong. We continued to mentor at the schools we had chosen, but it seemed that one of the biggest components of our organization, bringing kids to campus, had failed. Somehow, though, a teacher from a school in Brooklyn heard about our organization and contacted us. She wanted to bring a group of students from her school to campus. We were eager to work with her. The school itself bused the students to campus and provided chaperones. Ujima bought lunch for all of the students and gave them a tour of the campus, and a few volunteers spoke to them about college life. Just seeing the excitement in the eyes of the kids as they explored the campus made me feel that I was doing something worthwhile. I can't remember ever feeling more proud of myself.
Giving back, Rameck.
I discovered early in my childhood that you don't need money or status to enrich another person's life. Anybody with passion and purpose can do so. Throughout my life, people have given generously of their time, skills, money, and more to help me succeed. They all had busy lives, and they didn't owe me a thing, yet they gave. I've always believed that much is required of those to whom much is given, so I've always felt compelled to give back. George, Sam, and I believe strongly that God protected us and lifted us up so that we could become examples to kids today, especially kids growing up in poor communities. That's why we started the mentoring program called Ujima in our freshman year of college, and more recently, the Three Doctors Foundation. The ways to give are as balanced as your creativity. Maybe you're a nurturer and can mentor a younger or less experienced colleague on the job. Maybe you're good with children and can spend an extra few hours a week reading or tutoring kids at your local elementary school. Or maybe you have the cash to send a kid in your neighborhood to a summer camp or to buy groceries for a poor family during the holidays. Giving is like playing a position on a football team. Everybody can't be the quarterback. You may be a better linebacker, wide receiver, or water boy. The important thing is that you find your position, whatever it is, and play hard. As a teenager, I lacked the one person in my life who could have made a difference earlier. A male mentor, a respectable father figure who would have been willing to spend time with me consistently, giving me advice and sharing fun things to keep me away from bad influences in my neighborhood. I believe that most boys, regardless of who they are or where they live, long for that kind of relationship with a father, a big brother, or even a stranger who steps in to fill the void. And that desire for male guidance stays with us from childhood, when our lives are taking shape, to adulthood, when we are making crucial decisions about careers, life, and family. George always says that people should give, even if they are selfish, because there are selfish reasons to give. Your gift might touch the life of a child who otherwise might end up breaking into your house, jacking your car, or selling drugs to your child. Or your gift might help to raise the brain surgeon who someday saves your life. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but the point is that there's no excuse not to give, even if your reason is a selfish one. But there is another selfish reason to give. When you give to someone else, I found, surprisingly, that you often receive as well. In college, I discovered that when I went to elementary schools to tutor kids, I received as much as, or more than the children did. We live in an age of access, in which a person's value is attached to how much money he makes, what kind of car he drives, how many things have been acquired. But no monetary value can be placed on the feeling that comes when you know you've made a difference in another person's life. And all of us could use a boost in self-esteem, especially teenage boys, who can often be too macho to admit that they need a good pat on the back. And don't forget, when you touch another person's life, the gift keeps multiplying. Consider George's third grade teacher. She couldn't have known then that by making a difference in George's life, she someday would also make a difference in Sam's and mine.
Chapter 12. Lovesick, Rameck.
I always thought I was too cool to let a girl break my heart. Then I met the woman I'll call Kay. She was standing next to a friend of mine from high school after a party at Rutgers University in New Brunswick when I spotted her. She was so fine, on the tall side, with golden brown skin, shoulder-length dark brown hair, innocent eyes, and a tempting smile. "Who's your friend?" I asked my high school friend. So she introduced me to Kay and told her flattering things about me. Kay was a freshman at Rutgers University and was 2 years younger, but the chemistry between us was instant and powerful. She gave me her telephone number. When I called her the next day, we talked for nearly 5 hours straight. From South Orange to New Brunswick was a long-distance call, so I rang up a huge telephone bill those first few weeks as Kay and I got to know each other. She and I started hanging out together regularly. Sometimes we double-dated or triple-dated with Sam, George, and their dates. All of us would go out to dinner, to party, or bowling. Once, the 6 of us even went ice skating in New York City's Rockefeller Center. When George, Sam, or I had a girlfriend, she automatically became part of our group, like a little sister to the other 2 of us, and she was off limits as a potential date. That's why we never had a conflict over a girl. In the first few years of college, Sam and I played the field more than George, who more often than not had a steady girlfriend. Even though I played around, I always knew I wanted to get married and have children after college. I wanted to have the perfect family I had always hoped for as a kid. I didn't want to ever inflict the insecurity of a broken home, like the childhood I had, on a child. I tried to be careful. I couldn't have any baby mama drama disrupting my dreams. Things got serious pretty quickly between Kay and me, and we often talked about getting married and having kids together someday. I thought she was the one. But one night, while I was visiting her in her dorm room at Rutgers, her telephone kept ringing. She seemed uneasy when she answered it and gave one-word answers, yes or no, and then, I'll have to talk to you later. Who was that? I asked. She wasn't in the mood for my questions. We argued about it, and I left. Later that night over the telephone, she told me the truth. She had another boyfriend. He was a football jock who attended college in Boston. He had been her high school sweetheart, and though she didn't want to be with him anymore, she hadn't quite broken things off. I was crushed. How could I ever trust her? How could she do this to me? How could she do this to us? I broke up with her. I was miserable for a few weeks until we got back together. She promised me that the guy was out of her life for good, but the trust issue kept coming up. If she wasn't in her room when I called, I questioned her extensively. If she ignored her telephone when I was there, I got suspicious, and I felt justified. She knew she had to earn my trust again, and for a while she did all she could. She stayed in her room all day instead of hanging out with her friends just to prove to me that there was no other man in her life. She wanted me to trust her, but the questions and suspicions lingered. We broke up and got back together a million times. When we split, just before my senior year, it seemed like all the other times. I figured we would take some time to cool off, and then in a week or 2 we would be a couple again. But I didn't realize that she had taken all she would take of my lack of trust. We were done, she kept telling me. At first I didn't believe her. Then I started hearing rumors that she was dating someone else. I confronted her. It was true. My girl had moved on without me. The guy she was dating was a legendary player. Everybody knew it. He had dated practically all of the pretty girls on Rutgers campus, and all the others wanted him. Maybe it gave Kay's ego a boost to be with him. But that's when it hit me that I could lose her for good. I had heard of the term lovesick, and I figured it was something that happened to girls, certainly not a tough guy like me. But all of a sudden, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I lost weight. I started calling Kay a dozen times a day, trying to change her mind. I knew her new boyfriend didn't care for her the way I did. I loved this girl. I wanted to marry her. I wanted to have kids with her. I had to get her back. During one of those sleepless nights, a plan crystallized in my mind. Kay was the kind of woman who needed to be with her man all the time. I knew that once I began medical school, the workload would be so demanding that I wouldn't have time for her. Then after medical school, I'd have to do a residency, which would keep me even busier. I would be nearly 30 years old before I had time for a wife and kids. At 21, that seemed ancient. I decided I would just forget about medical school, marry Kay, and start our perfect family. I knew I could get a job teaching. Sam and I had arranged our schedules that semester to have a day off on which we would work as substitute teachers. I worked at a high school and an elementary school in a community called Hillside. The principal of the elementary school had approached me one day and asked me my major. Biology, I told him. We need teachers, he said. You're a young black man about to get a degree in biology. I have a job waiting for you when you finish. I wondered how I would tell Sam and George that I was about to break the pact. We had promised to stick together to the end, but I figured they would be alright without me. I figured they would understand. I had to live my own life. I called Kay and asked to see her. She refused. I told her I loved her and needed her in my life. Then she told me what I had been dreading to hear. She was falling for the other guy. She wanted to try to make it work with him, and nothing I said could change her mind. I never even got to tell her about my plan. I was lovesick for months. I'm sure Sam and George noticed. But guys are proud. We don't even let our closest boys know if our heart is hurting. "Nah, dog, I'm straight," I said when they asked about the weight loss. I never told Sam and George about my plan either. With my heart in pieces, I began preparing again for medical school.
Chapter 13. DWB, Rameck.
November 10th, 1996, about 2 a.m. I noticed the 3 cop cars just blocks down the road behind me. I had gotten together with friends to watch the Mike Tyson Evander Holyfield fight and ended up staying late to socialize after Holyfield shocked boxing fans everywhere with a TKO of Tyson just seconds into the 11th round. That many police in one place meant something was going on. I rolled down my window to take a closer look, but officers were laughing. Maybe they had watched the fight too. I locked eyes with one of them for a second. The laughter stopped. I glanced at my friend Dax, who was riding in the front seat. "Man, you know they're about to follow us," he said. All 3 officers jumped in their car and fell behind us, single file. We knew the drill. Practically every black man who has ever been behind the wheel of a car knows the drill. Make sure you're not speeding. Use the proper turn signals. Double check your seatbelt. Double check your lights. Don't make one wrong move. Without clicking on their red lights or sirens, they followed every turn I made for the next 10 minutes, just waiting for me to slip. "Man, why are they following us?" Dax asked, though he already knew the answer. I was taking my normal route home and turned onto a dark, secluded street. Seconds later, red lights began flashing in my rearview mirror. The steering wheel dampened in my grip. The warnings I had heard about Edison cops when I first learned to drive came rushing back. "Be careful there. They don't like black people." I began to second-guess myself. Maybe I shouldn't have made that turn. Who knows what 3 crazy white cops might do to 2 young black men on a dark street in a predominantly white suburb this time of the morning. It didn't matter that I was a first-year medical student or that Dax was in law school. The color of our skin alone was enough to make us suspect. This was 3 years before the state of New Jersey signed a consent decree agreeing to a major overhaul of the state police to end racial profiling and avoid a civil rights lawsuit by the U.S. Department of Justice. A case that helped to catapult the term racial profiling onto the front pages of newspapers across the nation. On this night, racial profiling, the crime of driving while black, was just the truth shared among black men. I was approaching a green traffic light. I rolled through, veered right, and began to pull to the side of the road. At the same time, the officer in the last car sped around the others, made a quick turn in front of me, and cut me off. He jumped out of the car with his gun drawn. The cop in the car immediately behind me clicked on his floodlights and jumped out of his car too. "Get the fuck out of the car," the cop with the gun yelled. Startled, Dax and I looked at each other. My knees felt weak as I stepped slowly out of the car. The officer ordered Dax out too. I was sure we were about to die. One of the officers rushed over and slammed me against the car. "Didn't you see my lights?" he yelled. He pointed his fingers in my face so close, it was almost touching. "Why in the fuck didn't you stop?" "I did stop," I said. "Not fast enough," he shouted back. He began patting me. "Why are you frisking me?" I asked. "What's going on?" "Shut the fuck up," the officer said. "You should have pulled over when you saw our lights." The other officers rifled through my car. "Hey man, you can't go through my car," I said. "Why are you searching my car?" They ignored me and popped my trunk. "You got any drugs or guns?" they asked, continuing their search without waiting for me to answer. "Aha! Look what I found," one of the officers yelled gleefully from inside the car. I shook my head in disbelief. Oh my God, what if they planted inside my car, I wondered. The officer held up a small knife about the size of a pencil. It was an old fishing knife that I had thrown in the glove compartment and forgotten. It never occurred to me that carrying it around was illegal. "You're being a smartass. Now you're going to jail," the officer said. He snapped on a pair of handcuffs much too tightly and left me standing in the rain while he stepped away to talk to his fellow officers. Within minutes, I was soaked. I was grateful for the heavier than usual traffic because I figured it offered a bit more protection, but at the same time I was deeply embarrassed. Passengers stared as cars slowed almost to a stop. I looked up in time to see one guy in a passing car shake his head at me in disgust. Finally, the officer led me to a police car and pushed me into the back seat. "It ain't no black thing either," he said. "You should have pulled over when we told you to." "Man, I'm a medical student. My friend is about to go to law school. You're not taking me anywhere until you call your supervisor," I said. He called for a sergeant over the car radio. At least 3 more police cars rolled up. An officer I presume was a sergeant was in one of them. He walked over to the car where I was and listened as the officers told their side of the story. He walked away without even acknowledging me. I noticed a couple of officers talking to Dax, who was still standing next to my car. They allowed him to drive my car home, but they took me to jail and booked me with some ridiculous charges: interference with a police officer and possession of a deadly weapon. They put me in a cell alone. I couldn't believe this was happening. I hadn't done anything wrong, and possession of a deadly weapon is a felony. I would never pass the medical licensing process with a felony on my record as an adult. I would never become a doctor now. I looked up to find a white officer that I had not seen before standing outside my cell. He identified himself as a sergeant. "How are you doing?" he asked. His voice was kind. "I'm all right," I said calmly. "What happened?" For the first time, I told my side of the story. He glanced to the right, then his left, as though he was looking for someone. No one was there. "You should file a complaint," he said, then walked away. About 3 hours after I was locked up, an officer unlocked the cell. "Your friends are upstairs," he said when I asked to use the phone. I have never been so happy to see George, Sam, Dax, and Naeem. When the officers let Dax go, he had driven to our apartment and picked up Sam. They called George, who told them he and Naeem would meet them at the Edison jail. All 4 of them had been waiting for hours. When I made it home, it was nearly 7 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in my room and replayed the night's events in my head. A few hours later, I called my mother and told her what had happened. She promised to call her lawyer, who had gotten her out of trouble a few times before. The lawyer agreed to represent me pro bono as a favor to my mother. I explained that I was not open to a plea bargain. My career would have to survive this, and the only way was to get the charges wiped off my record. My lawyer advised me that the simplest approach would be to persuade the officer to drop the charges. He assured me that he would take care of it. In the meantime, I went back to the police station and filed a complaint. As the weeks passed, I had trouble sleeping. A couple of times, bad dreams jolted me awake in a cold sweat. I had worked so hard to change my life. Now I could lose everything. During a preliminary hearing, I saw the arrest report for the first time, which explained why the officers claimed they had stopped me. The tint on my windows and dirty license plate cover made me look suspicious, they said. Before the hearing began, my lawyer walked over to the prosecutor, sat next to him, and began to whisper. He pleaded my case and asked the prosecutor, a young guy fresh out of law school, to persuade the police officer to drop the charges. The prosecutor seemed to sympathize and agreed to help. Both lawyers then asked the judge to postpone the hearing. When I heard from my lawyer again, the news was bad. The officer had refused to drop the charges. The prosecutor suspected the reason was because I had filed a complaint against the officer. The complaint had been reviewed and resolved in his favor, but it still went in his personal file as a complaint. The judge set a new trial. But on the day the judge was scheduled to hear my case, my attorney didn't show up. The judge set a new date. My lawyer missed it again. The judge set a third date. My lawyer missed that one too. The judge was angry. "Listen, young man," he said to me. "I don't know who your lawyer is, but he has no respect for you or your well-being. I'm about to set a new date, and this case will be tried with or without your lawyer. If I were you, I would sue him and get a new lawyer." By now, I was frantic. While my peers planned their futures and anticipated clinical rotations at hospitals in the area for the following semester, I was worrying that this might be the end for me. I had no money and no way of getting a new lawyer, and I feared the public defender would try to plead my life away. I turned to Dr. Diedrich, a Jewish physician who had become my friend while treating my mother for a job-related injury. When she had bragged to him that her son was in medical school, he asked to meet me. She had persuaded me to accompany her to his office. I did, and he became something of a mentor. He called regularly. During one of those calls, I explained what was going on. He called an attorney who was a friend of his. His friend agreed to help. When the new trial date rolled around, my new lawyer and I showed up in court without a clue about what kind of defense to use. The knife found in my car was indeed mine, and under the circumstances, it was against the law. God, please help me out of this, I prayed silently. The judge called my case. My attorney and I sat behind a table on one side of the courtroom. I looked into the audience and saw the police officer again for the first time since my arrest. The charges were read. The prosecutor approached the judge, who hastily called a recess. I wondered what was going on. After a brief recess, the trial began again. Well, we can't seem to find the evidence, the prosecutor said. I couldn't believe it. They had lost the knife. The prosecutor asked the judge to postpone the trial again. Clearly frustrated, the judge refused. Instead, he threw the case out. My mouth dropped open. God had rescued me once again, and I was free to go.
Chapter 16.
Ma always talked about retiring and moving to South Carolina. Soon after I began medical school, she did just that. After having worked as a clerk at the Newark Post Office for 28 years, she bought a beautiful 3-bedroom house that sat on a cul-de-sac in a secluded neighborhood in Columbia, the state capital. She liked the slow pace and the beauty of the area. Ma initially planned to sell the family house in Plainfield, but she decided to keep it when the offers were lower than expected. She also wanted to have a place for her children to go if any of them ever needed a place to stay. It seemed that Ma would finally get to relax and enjoy the rest of her life. She had worked hard for so long, but in 1997, the family noticed that she didn't look well when she returned home to visit her youngest daughter, Nicole, who had just had a baby. Ma's stomach was swollen as though she was pregnant. Her skin had darkened, and the whites of her eyes had a yellowish tint. My aunt urged her to see a doctor. About 2 months later, Ma called and told Nicole that her doctor had diagnosed her with cirrhosis of the liver. The family kept it from me. By the time I found out, Ma was so sick that my Uncle Sheldon, a school teacher in New York, was heading to Columbia for the summer to help take care of her. Something's wrong with her liver, my aunt said when she called to tell me. My family often hid bad news from me while I was away at school. They didn't want me to worry. When I first heard about Ma, I didn't get alarmed because she had bounced back quickly before when a chest aneurysm forced her early retirement from the post office. It was the only other time I had ever seen her sick. But this time, Ma kept getting sicker. When it was time for my uncle to return to New York to go back to work, the family realized that Ma couldn't stay in South Carolina alone. She needed to come back to Plainfield to be closer to the family. At first, she resisted, but reality forced her to give in. When Ma moved back home, she didn't look like herself. She had lost so much weight that she was skinny. Her skin was so dry and scaly that she scratched all the time. But even on her sickest day, I never saw her break down or cry. Don't worry about me, she always said. But I did worry. Ma was slipping away and I knew it. Nothing in life had prepared me to lose the woman who had been as close as a mother to me. I lived 1.5 hours away, but I drove to Plainfield as often as I could to visit her. In my last year of medical school, Ma's liver began to fail. For months, she was transferred from one hospital to the next for treatment. She landed at Mount Sinai in Manhattan. Once the doctors had to intubate her. I rushed to her bedside. She couldn't speak, but I sat next to her, stroked her hand, and assured her that everything would be all right. I had seen many patients this way, but now it was personal. Seeing my grandmother so uncomfortable helped me to be more sensitive to patients I encountered in medical school during my clinical rotations. I even chose gastroenterology as a specialty because I wanted to understand what was going on with my grandmother and someday keep others from suffering as much as she suffered. Doctors were unsure what had caused this cirrhosis. The family turned to me with their questions. I felt helpless. I was a medical student, not a seasoned specialist, and I didn't have any answers. Her doctor seemed to be guessing about the cause of her illness. When I told him that Ma was not a heavy drinker, he said that even an occasional binge on alcohol could have caused the problem. I was offended by the suggestion. Only 2 things were certain. Ma needed a new liver soon, and if she didn't get one, she would die. The hospital placed her on the list of people waiting for liver transplants, but the doctor explained that because the wait could be as long as a year, she would probably not live to get a new liver. The doctor also presented us with a riskier alternative. The diseased part of Ma's liver could be replaced with a piece of a healthy liver from a living donor. I volunteered immediately to be tested as a possible match. I was scared, but I loved my grandmother. I figured I was young and healthy and could rebound quickly after the surgery. I talked to George and Sam about my decision. "Do what you gotta do, dog," they told me. "We'll be there for you." I was prepared to go forward with the testing for the procedure, but my mother, aunts, and uncles talked me out of it. They said they needed me to be healthy, to communicate with the doctors, and didn't want to put me at risk. Most of the other family members, who were willing to be tested, had been ruled out as potential donors by the hospital's list of criteria, so we prayed and waited for a donor to be found elsewhere. Ma's illness proved to be a trying time for our family. When she could no longer take care of herself, the finger-pointing began about who wasn't doing enough to help. Ma had always been the one who solved problems and brought calm. Without her mediation, matters often dissolved into chaos. My aunts and uncles sometimes went without speaking until the next crisis brought them together. Through it all, Ma never stopped encouraging me. "I'm so proud of you," she would say. "You're doing so good." My graduation was approaching, and I prayed that Ma would be able to make it. I wanted her to see me walk across the stage and become Dr. Rameck Hunt. I wanted her to witness the miracle that her faith in me had brought. On graduation day, I kept looking into the stands for my family. They had helped me as much as they could have. When I began medical school and couldn't afford the expensive books, my mother's brothers and sisters had pooled money and sent it to me every month for several months. I've always been very grateful to them for that. From my seat near the front of the auditorium, the faces in the crowd looked blurred. But one time as I scanned the room, I noticed someone sitting in a wheelchair in the aisle. I couldn't make out the face, but I knew it was Ma. She had been determined to see this day. When the ceremony ended, my family wheeled her down to greet me. I threw my arms around her. She couldn't have given me a more special gift. About 3 weeks later, the hospital called Ma with good news. A donor for her had been located. She happened to be home alone, but she needed to get to the hospital right away. A liver can function outside the body for only a limited time. Ma called her children. Nicole contacted her husband, Jose, who worked in Plainfield and was just about to leave for the day. He drove to Ma's house and, escorted by Port Authority police, rushed her to Mount Sinai. Other family members met him there and waited in the family room while she underwent the surgery. Doctors had told Jose that the operation was expected to take 6 hours. There was a high risk that Ma could die during the surgery. But when the team of doctors emerged from the operating room 2 hours early, my aunts and uncles took that as a good sign. They were right. The surgery was a success. When I heard the good news, I felt hopeful for the first time in months that she would get better. Ma's recovery was going so well that the doctor released her from the hospital within a week. She began to feel stronger and look healthier, but that lasted just a few days. On June 19th, 1999, the day before the family was scheduled to gather at a cookout in West Orange to celebrate my graduation, Ma developed a fever and had to return to the hospital. We didn't think it was serious because she had experienced a similar episode a couple of days earlier and the fever had gone away. The weather for the cookout was perfect, sunny and hot. A large crowd of my family and friends, including Sam and George, spent the afternoon eating, drinking, dancing, and playing cards. I kept in touch with the doctor by phone. That night, Sam and I were out on a double date when Ma's doctor called me on my cellular phone. Her blood pressure had dropped to dangerously low levels, and the infection had crept all over her body. I needed to get to the hospital right away. On the way there, I prayed that Mom would be okay, but somehow I knew she wouldn't. When I arrived, family members were crying and hugging each other in the family room just outside the intensive care unit. Mom was gone. In my grief, I needed answers. I needed to know who was to blame. Had the doctor sent Ma home too soon? Was the liver they transplanted infected already? What had gone wrong? I pushed for an autopsy, but my family wouldn't hear of it. That wouldn't bring her back, they said, nor would it erase my pain. It was the hardest thing that I had ever done, but I accepted their decision. I let her go.
Really makes us feel good when we finish a speech at a school, church, or community center, and kids come up to us in their cliques and say they're going to form their own pact. When the three of us promised in high school to see each other through to become doctors, we had no idea how we'd get through. We honestly didn't even give it much thought. But we realized since then that each of us was successful individually in large part because of our pact. The pact gave us the motivation to keep pushing when it would have been easier to just give up. So we've come up with a few pieces of advice to help others unite with friends to reach short-term or long-term goals. We believe these steps can be useful to the group, no matter what the goal is. First, join trustworthy friends who have the same goal. George was the one who put our pact together. Though two of us, Rameck and Sam, initially had different ideas about what we wanted to do after high school, we came around to George's way of thinking before making our promise to one another. Next, find strength in your differences. Friends don't have to be alike to be part of a pact. The three of us all have distinct personalities that we bring to the mix, and that just makes our bond all the more interesting and strong. We draw from one another's strengths, but to be able to keep our promise to one another, we first had to want the same thing. The few times when our promise threatened to break apart was when one of us began to want something different from what the other two wanted. We also had to trust each other completely. We had to believe that we had one another's back, or crazy suspicions of each other's motives might have driven us apart. Next, believe in yourself and your friends. After we graduated from high school, Rameck's younger sister, Daima, ended up with the same biology teacher that he'd had, the one he didn't like. When Daima told the teacher that she was Rameck's sister, the teacher asked whether he had become a bum. No, Daima said proudly. He's a doctor. That teacher may not have believed that Rameck was ever going to do anything positive with his life. But all three of us knew he was smart and would find a way to make a positive difference in the world. All three of us had and still have that kind of faith in each other. It just doesn't make much sense to hook up with somebody you can't believe in. Next, compete in a healthy way. This is a biggie because healthy competition pushed each of us to be at the top of our game all the time. Each of us wanted to perform as well as the other two. But understand that healthy competition is just that, healthy, which means there's no room for jealousy. Jealousy would have brought too much negative energy to our group. It would have made us question the trust that is so integral to our friendship and to the very nature of a pact. If any of us ever felt even a bit envious of the others, it never surfaced in a way that was obvious to us. We celebrated one another's successes, and each one of us felt the same hurt when one of our boys failed at something. Next, communicate openly, honestly, and often. This kept us sane. We hung out together and talked every day about what we were going through. We compared notes and gave each other advice and suggestions. Rameck and Sam were roommates for all 8 years, and to be successful at it, they learned to talk out their differences better than many married couples. There were times, though, when we kept things from each other. Times when sharing our feelings was difficult. We blamed that on just being guys. In our case, the stereotype, guys don't share their feelings with each other, was definitely true. If we have any regrets, that's probably chief among them. Our inability to communicate when Sam felt like he was dying inside forced him to look outside the group for support. There was nothing wrong with that, except we risked isolating him and leaving him feeling resentful. Fortunately for us, things didn't turn out that way. And finally, lean on your friends and allow them to lean on you. This is just an extension of the friendship bond, but it becomes particularly important when you're working together to reach a goal, because the pact essentially ties your fates together. One of the main benefits of forming a pact with friends is that you have an automatic network of support. You shouldn't have to seek elsewhere to find it. The three of us didn't truly realize how much we had accomplished together until we started working on this book. Of course, we understood the enormity of our achievements. We can hardly believe them ourselves. But working together on this project, going over our years together, we feel great pride. And we also feel awe. Awe in the power of friendship, a power greater than any one of us could have individually. After writing this book, we see more clearly than ever that we needed each other to achieve our dreams. Even as we write, we are just weeks away from completing our residencies. Sam will be starting as an emergency room attending physician, a head doctor at Beth Israel in Newark. George will be an administrator and assistant professor at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey in Newark, and he is working on his master's in public health. Rameck will be starting as an assistant professor and director of the outpatient clinic at St. Peter's University Hospital in New Brunswick, just a few miles away. Our pact has extended beyond anything we could have ever imagined in high school. Through our nonprofit organization, the Three Doctors Foundation, we hope to inspire and create opportunities for inner city communities by providing education, mentoring, and health awareness. The foundation is a vehicle through which we do our community work. We do public speaking engagements together. We go to schools, colleges, churches, and even corporations to share our story. We've come a long way from the streets of Newark in some ways, but not that far at all in others. Our hearts are still with the families and friends who didn't have the opportunities, the friendships, or maybe even the crazy dreams that were somehow given to us. Those who are still struggling every day just to survive. They are the reason we wrote this book. Davis, Dr. George Jenkins, and Dr. Rameck Hunt.